Nairobi is a city of striking contrasts. On one side you have glittering skyscrapers, modern expressways, and luxury estates. On the other, sprawling informal settlements, daily traffic gridlocks, and a city constantly struggling to keep up with its rapid expansion. But how did Nairobi become the city it is today? To understand that, we need to go back to its origins. A colonial railway stop that turned into Kenya's capital, and eventually one of the Africa's most dynamic cities. In this video, I will explore how colonial urban planning shaped Nairobi's layout, how land use changed after independence, and the city's current urban challenges, from British segregation policies to today's urban sprawl. This is the story of Nairobi's urban evolution. This is the first of a series of videos I've made about Nairobi and Kenya. Nairobi's origins are deeply tied to the construction of the Uganda Railway, a British colonial project aimed at securing British control over East Africa and expanding trade. In 1899, the British established a railway depot where Nairobi now stands. This location was chosen because of its elevation, which was 1,795 meters above sea level, which provided a cooler climate and reduced risk of malaria, as well as its access to water sources. At the time, Nairobi was nothing more than a swampy stretch of land occupied by the Maasai and Kikuyu communities. However, the railway depot quickly attracted European settlers, Indian laborers, and African workers, turning it into a small town. By 1905, Nairobi had become the capital of British East Africa, replacing Mombasa. The British then began organizing the city based on strict racial segregation, following colonial urban planning models similar to those in South Africa and India. The British designed Nairobi with a clear racial and class hierarchy in mind. European settlers lived in spacious, green, and well-planned areas such as Mataigo, Karen, and Upper Hill, with large plots of land and access to modern infrastructure. Indian traders and laborers were confined to Eastleigh and Pangani, with smaller plots and limited services. Africans, who were the majority of the workforce, were pushed into poorly serviced native reserves like Kibera, Kariokor, and Pumwani, with little access to water, sanitation, and electricity. Colonial authorities enforced these divisions using zoning laws, ensuring that different racial groups lived in separate parts of the city. Public spaces, parks, and services were designed almost exclusively for Europeans. Despite being the capital, Nairobi's infrastructure was built primarily for the elite. The colonial government prioritized roads for settlers, while public transportation was underdeveloped. Water, sanitation, and electricity were scarce in African neighborhoods, leading to overcrowding and the early formation of informal settlements. Even the city's central business district was designed with segregation in mind. Europeans owned businesses, while Africans were mainly laborers, with little access to commercial opportunities. However, this racial urban structure wouldn't last forever. By the mid-20th century, anti-colonial resistance was growing, and Nairobi was the center of Kenya's push for independence. When Kenya gained independence in 1963, Nairobi's urban landscape still reflected its colonial past. Most land was controlled by the elite, and urban services were concentrated in former European areas. One of the government's first challenges was redistributing land and expanding housing for the growing African middle class and working population. Key changes included the end of racial zoning laws, allowing Africans to live in formerly European neighborhoods, expansion of Nairobi's boundaries to accommodate rapid population growth, new public housing projects such as Jericho, Buruburu, and Umoja aimed at providing homes for middle-class families. However, despite these effects, land ownership remained unequal. Much of Nairobi's prime land was quickly acquired by political elites, leaving many low-income residents without affordable housing options. While formal neighborhoods were expanding, urban migration outpaced development. Thousands of rural Kenyans flocked to Nairobi in search of work, but the city couldn't house them all. As a result, slums like Kibera, Mathare, and Mukuru grew rapidly. By the 1980s, these informal settlements housed nearly one-third of Nairobi's population, with little access to water, sanitation, or proper roads. The government often ignored these areas, leading to worsening living conditions and an increasing divide between rich and poor. Post-independence urban planning also focused on car ownership, following the Western-style city models. New highways and major roads were built, but public transportation remained underdeveloped. This led to more reliance on matatus, or privately owned minibuses, as the primary mode of transportation. Traffic congestion as private car ownership increased, and urban sprawl as people moved further from the city center due to high land prices. By the 1990s, Nairobi was struggling with poor public transportation, informal housing growth, and inadequate infrastructure, setting the stage for the challenges the city faces today. Nairobi's population has exploded to over 4.4 million people, and its roads are now some of the most congested in Africa. The city's transport issues include over-reliance on matatus and boda-bodas, or motorbike taxis, which operate in the chaotic system. Lack of modern mass transit system, such as subways and light rail. Massive traffic jams, with some commuters spending up to 3 hours per day stuck in traffic. To address this, the government has introduced projects like the Nairobi Expressway and the plans for a bus rapid transit system, but challenges remain. Despite economic growth, nearly 60% of Nairobi's population still live in informal settlements. Housing remains expensive, and many residents are forced into overcrowded slums or distant suburbs with poor infrastructure. Efforts such as affordable housing projects under the Big Four agenda are underway, but corruption and mismanagement often slow progress. Rapid urbanization has led to the following: deforestation of Karura forest and Ngong forest to make way for real estate, water shortage and pollution due to poor waste management, and encroachment to Nairobi National Park threatening wildlife. Some initiatives like greening Nairobi's riverbanks and expanding pedestrian-friendly areas aim to create a more sustainable city. Nairobi's urban history is a story of colonial segregation, post-independence expansion, and modern-day struggles with rapid growth. From its railway depot origins to its current status as East Africa's economic hub, the city has come a long way. However, to ensure a better future, Nairobi must tackle traffic congestion, housing inequality, and environmental sustainability. With the right urban policies, investment in public transportation, and better planning, the city can transform into a truly inclusive and efficient metropolis. So what do you think? Can Nairobi overcome these challenges, or will urban sprawl and congestion continue to define the city's future?